Hi everybody, welcome to this short introduction to our MSc in Criminology module, PUP 714, Victims and Restorative Justice. This module is shared between myself, Dr. Brian Payne, and my colleague, Dr. Hugh Campbell. So what's PUP 714 all about, I hear you ask? Well, I'll try to answer that question in the next couple of minutes. We pack a lot in across the 12 weeks that this module runs. We begin with some critical victimology and explore the role of victims within our society. In particular, we consider the portrayal of victims in key forums, including the court of public opinion and social media, but also in print and broadcast media. But also we look at how victims interact with key institutions of government, in particular the criminal justice system and the courtroom. We describe key concepts such as developing a victim identity, which we see within the courtroom, or the concept of the ideal victim, where characteristics of a victim seem to have some impact on how a victim is portrayed or how they might be conceived. With some victims considered to have more positive and more beneficial characteristics and which maybe leads to a more favourable outcome for them. We contrast that with the adversarial nature of criminal justice and how, victims sometimes, if they don't have the right attributes, are shuttled off to the side, or where we have a victim that is considered to be an ideal victim, they're almost commoditized sometimes and put front and central in these types of interactions. We then broaden out our critique of criminal justice to consider the role of other key actors, such as offenders within the criminal justice system, as well as community members and other stakeholders, and we contrast that with the key values and goals of restorative justice, which seeks to put victims and offenders and community members together to try to promote dialogue and discuss what has happened when there has been an incident of harm or a wrongdoing or a crime has been committed, and tries to come up with positive ways of managing or dealing with that. Then the module continues on to consider the application of restorative justice in some quite difficult and demanding settings. We look at the use of restorative justice as a response to paramilitary punishment violence, or child abuse as many people call it, where young people are maimed by armed groups by shooting them through kneecaps and elbows or beating them with baseball bats, etc. And we look at the use of community-based restorative justice as a response to that in Northern Ireland. We also look at the use of restorative justice in responding to institutionalized abuse. For example, in the abuse of women in places like Magdalen laundries, but also in institutions for looked after children, for example, which has been very topical and in the news lately. We look at the use of restorative practices as a response to sexual harm, which is one of the most demanding and difficult scenarios, I think, for which restorative justice might be put forward. And we look at that in terms of it being a very victim-driven process, and something that victims quite often request because they perhaps feel that they have not had the same sort of outcomes, or the most positive outcomes from the criminal justice response that can often go with this as well. Other things that we look to are restorative justice in incidences where the state has perhaps not performed as well as it should, or where they have questions to answer. For example, we look at the use of restorative justice after major disasters such as the Hillsborough tragedy or the sinking of the Marchioness ferry in the River Thames, for example. We also look at restorative justice in schools and how this is one of the most growing areas that we are seeing restorative practice, as I suppose we should call it, where it's being used as a way of transforming disciplinary processes and responses to perceived rule breaking, but also in terms of engendering a much more positive and collegial culture between students, and also empowering students within schools to actually take charge, of these whole processes. And quite often we see students now running their own forums and own restorative processes to deal with something that's happened that's caused, harm or upset, within the school setting. We also look at restorative justice in different settings, such as within our local communities, as well as using the use of restorative justice with respect to truth and reconciliation as well in post-conflict societies. In particular, we're looking at case studies of places like South Africa, Rwanda, Sierra Leone and Ghana, as well as our own situation here, where truth and reconciliation is something which is always a bit of a political hot potato. So we squeeze a lot in there, but it makes for a really fascinating module, which really explores the very limits of restorative justice, I think, and its associated practices. So I hope you found that interesting and you want to hear more. And I hope to see you all in the coming years on our MSc in Criminology. Thanks very much.